Your plants will determine what soil pH it wants. I love this. This is so cool. So plants will either exude through their roots sugars or acids, and that subsequently is connected to soil pH.
You're listening to How I Grow This, exploring stories of gardeners from across the globe as we learn from their biggest tips and tricks to some of the things not to do. I'm your host, Luke Hammond. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of How I Grow This. I'm so excited for today's episode. It's with my friend Christy Wilhelmi of The Garden Nerd, and she has been doing this so long and actually sharing her story and digging in deep into soil health and plant health, and she is a breadth of knowledge and wisdom, and I'm going to do my best to pry with questions to help you guys in your garden, and so that you can take what she's learned and apply that to your life. So Christy, welcome to the How I Grow This podcast.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
And it is so good to have you. I want to kind of start off the conversation talking about how you got started. I think that kind of share when you started gardening at first, and then kind of move into when you started talking about gardening and writing books and doing all the cool stuff as well.
Yeah, it was a transition from one to the other, but it was kind of natural in the way that it happened. I started gardening. I was an apartment dweller like so many people living in cities. I had a balcony, and then I got a patio, and I was growing in containers. And when I moved to Los Angeles, was driving down the road one day and I saw a sign for a community garden, and it was like, pull over, screech, and pulled over. Back then, you had to write down the P.O. box number and mail in your request for an application, and then they would mail you back an application and you fill it out and mail it in. Now everything's on the internet, of course, but I waited 8 months for a plot, which back then was no time at all, and got a plot at a community garden here in LA. And that really started my journey on growing food. I think it's also connected to when I became a vegetarian around that same time. And the more I was learning about our food system, the more I wanted control over it. So I felt like the more I could grow of my own, the better my health would be in my life in general. So that's kind of where it all started. And then as I was gardening in my community garden, people started seeing what I was growing and how well it was doing, and started asking me questions. And after a few years of that, eventually people were like, you should do this for a living. And so I was like, I hadn't even really thought about that. But eventually I created Garden Nerd. It started out as a blog. And then a little shop on Cafe Press, because I was like, the logo's cool, so let's just do that.
Yeah.
And then I plotted my path to quitting my day job and doing this full time after that. And then that was in 2008 was when I left my day job.
Okay, so when was it that you saw a community garden and slammed the brakes and pulled over and tried to, when was that?
Yeah, right. So that was 1997. Yes, 1997. And I put my application in, and in 1998, I got my plot, and I still have the same plot all these years later.
Whoa. So 1997. So the internet is like just becoming a thing.
Yeah. Yeah. We were there. So my community garden, this is kind of a cute little thing that we have mailboxes at each plot. Everyone's last name and plot number has to be on their mailbox. And that's basically what it's used for today, is to identify who owns this plot. But back then, that was the way that we delivered notes and citations and how you communicated with your neighbors if you didn't have their phone number. But now, of course, that's obsolete, and everyone just stores their gardening tools in there.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, so there's this little mailbox. How big is this community garden that you've had this plot at for? Wait, what is the math on that?
Let's do the math.
28 years?
It's 28 years, basically. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
So the garden is the second largest community garden in Southern California.
Okay.
It has 500 plots, and there's more than 1,000 members. Each plot is roughly 15 feet by 15 feet. So
Okay.
from the beginning, I have been focused on growing in small spaces and trying to make the most of it. So that eventually, naturally became the thing that I focus on for all of my books and my classes and everything that I do. Because most people don't have a lot of space. And
Sure.
I think when I talk to people, they're like, oh, I only have an acre. I'm like, huh, what I wouldn't give for an acre. My God, that's so much space. But mostly I'm dealing in square footage, not
Hmm.
square miles. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah. Or acres or some
Right.
other, measurement tool. So you have this 15 by 15-foot plot, and you have neighbors of all different garden and practices,
Mm-hmm.
and 500 of them that you have to share space with. What is that like relationally between all these different people? Does that just become a melting pot of good or a melting pot of tension?
Yeah,
Walk through some of that.
it's both. It's both of those things. In fact, it became the subject of my first novel, Garden Variety. It's set in a community garden, very much like
Hmm.
the one I belong to. And it's all the different characters, the different kinds of people who are together and trying to work together in a small space. So there is I would say, infighting. There's drama. There's, your weeds are too encroaching on my plot, that kind of thing. But there's
Okay.
also an equal amount of, hey, I've got too many cucumbers. Do you want some? And, sharing advice between plots and
Hmm.
all of the good things that come with having a space to garden next to someone else who would otherwise not have a space to garden. So it's very cool in that way. And it is a melting pot of we have it just in my section of the garden alone. There are people from Africa, different parts of Africa, the Caribbean. There are some Chinese gardeners up the way from me. I have someone from Australia nearby. I'm just like kind of going through the plots.
Sure.
There's it's just a big melting pot of different cultures coming together in one place. So I love
That's
it.
super cool. Super
Yeah,
cool. Now, as you describe these plots, can you describe them a little bit more? When
sure.
you say weeds encroaching on other people's plots, like are they divided by a 2x4? Is this all in ground? Are they raised beds? What does this space look like? Is it like a farmer's market where it's like you get a tent?
Right.
Yeah.
So we're on a slope, and so there are retaining walls to keep the slope in place.
Okay.
And everyone's plot is bordered by wooden planks of some kind. And
Okay.
because the garden is older than as long as I've been, I mean, the garden started in 1970 something, and then the part that I garden in was developed in 1984, I believe. And so there's a lot of timber that's been there for a long time. Some is new, some is old.
Hmm.
We use pipe to hold the retaining walls up, that kind of stuff. And
Right.
then in the garden itself, because we have very, very sandy soil, a lot of people, oh, and gophers, by the way, because we
Hmm.
share the space. The flat part of this property is run by the Little League. There's a Little League baseball field or organization up there. And so it's just giant open space where gophers thrive, and they come
Hmm.
down to the garden for the snack bar, right?
Hmm.
So they're tunneling, and so most of us are trying to protect our crops. And because of the sandy soil, which has a history of having lead in it, we often build raised beds and go up. So we're mostly, I have 4 raised beds in my plot. They're 4x4
Uh-huh.
because when I started gardening, I was using the square foot gardening method for sure, and I still do. But it was a very efficient way of plotting things out and making the most of the space.
Uh-huh.
So, but some people grow in the ground, and some people are using containers that they're burying so that if there's something that they don't want to leave in the garden when they leave the garden, they can take it up with them and go.
Okay.
Yeah. So does that make sense? Did I
It does.
clarify
Are
all the details?
are these containers often it kind of opens up a bunch of different questions that I have just relationally of interpersonal dynamics.
Mm-hmm.
how do people handle, because some things that are cut and dry for some people are not cut and dry for others. And
Yeah.
so if you've got gopher problems, do people aggressively trap gophers, or is it all protection? Are people fighting over people that are using gopher traps or gopher gassing, or like what kind of tensions do you guys have around pest control?
Yeah. So there are a set of rules. I should start by saying that the garden is governed by a set of rules and regulations. And so that is basically, those are there to keep everybody in check and happy and, relating to each other in a civil way. So there are boundaries on the plots, and you're not supposed to plant things right up against the boundaries. You're supposed to be
Gotcha.
2 feet in so that there's not, room. But a lot of people will talk to their neighbors and say, hey, I want to plant this. Would you like some too? So they'll put something in between them and both parties will share. In terms of gophers, it's funny you should mention gophers because I just trapped one this morning. And even though I've been vegetarian for 30 years, I do trap gophers and rats because they are prey animals. They reproduce way more quickly than the predators that we have living on the property. So we have hawk perches and owl boxes and lots of wildlife that come through. There are actually coyotes living across the street in the airport that is across the street from the garden. And they come over, and I have found parts of bodies lying around. I have found little
like gophers and rabbit bodies, right? Not like gardener bodies, right?
We had cats living on the property. There were 11 cats that were born there, and they were taking care of most of the rodent issues for years and years and years. But one by one, those have died off, and we have not replaced them. And then, and also the coyotes have had their
Gotcha.
their meals around that. So I found half a cat once. That was sad. But mostly it's up to us to regulate, or I should say control the population. Because while we have set up this great ecosystem for the garden to operate with hawks, I'll walk into the garden, a hawk is sitting right there looking at me. I'm like, oh, hi.
That's fun.
I'm like, there's a gopher hole right over here. Come, stand watch. And I've watched a hawk pull a gopher out of the hole and like work on it. I'm like, yes, good for you. Circle of life stuff, right? Yeah. So that kind of thing is important. And I think we know. Now, I have a neighbor who is very much of a pacifist, and she does not like it when I set traps. But she, once her stuff started getting pulled under by the gophers, she was like, okay, yeah, fine. No worries. So I set the gopher traps, and the one I'm using is working really well.
Great. Which one is that?
So it's called the Gopher Hawk. It's a post, like a long stick, that has a spring-loaded trigger and a claw that opens up at the end. And so when you find a tunnel, you stick it down in the hole, and you set the trap by pulling the spring back, and it locks into place, and the claw comes out the bottom and opens up. And then when a gopher hits there's a little what do you call it? Like a trigger here. And when the gopher's head hits it, it closes up that little trap and pulls it back up into the thing. So they basically die really quickly by a blunt trauma to the head.
Gotcha.
Sorry to be so graphic, but yeah, that's how it works. And it's been incredibly successful for me because I don't like setting a trap by hand and sticking it down the hole. And this thing is really kind of hands off. It's external settings only, so it's great.
That's awesome. Very cool. So let's talk a little bit about the guidelines within. Normally at this point, we've already talked a little bit about growing context, but now we've got 500 different plots on this ground that probably covers, a little over an acre and a half?
Oh, no, we're on 7 acres.
Okay, 7 acres. So there's quite a bit of space. I guess 500. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So you've got a 7-acre community garden space, and you're located in Los Angeles. And so you're in growing zone 9?
We are technically 10B now. We used to
Okay.
be 9B, but then
Okay.
the shift of the
Yep.
hardiness zone map, and we are 10B now. And someday we will be 11A, and we will be super tropical. We started getting summer rains a little while, like 4 or 5 years ago. We started getting rain in July, which was weird.
Uh-huh.
We never ever had rain in July. So we didn't get any this year. It's been quite dry this year. But anyway, I digress. We're in that space.
And so over the last 30 years, you've seen some shifting in temperature swings. What would you say those temperatures would be from maybe early on, in the early 2000s to now?
Yeah, it's interesting because I wrote the first couple of chapters of Garden Variety in 2001,
Hmm.
before I had to put it away for almost 8 years. But in that time, I went from writing that in October there was the smell of fireplace smoke, like people lighting
Sure.
fires in their
Yep.
homes to keep things warm, to the smell of wildfire smoke because
Mm.
it's so hot and everything's burning. So that was the biggest change, I think, is that our dry season has gotten longer
Mm-hmm.
and and hotter,
Mm-hmm.
and the shift of when we plant things went from, for example, our calendar is different than most of the countries anyway, because we plant our cool season crops in the fall. And we
Mm-hmm.
used to plant our cool season crops in about late September, early October. But now we have to wait until end of October, early November before we put in our cool season crops, or else they'll just bake. So
Mm-hmm.
we don't, we just wait. And then we grow through the winter because we don't have a frost here. We're close to the ocean, so everything's buffered. And then our warm season stuff starts going in like March, April. It used to be February, and now it's March, April's a little later. So it shifted, just rotated a little
Mm.
bit toward uh, later.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about some of the, I guess, community dynamics of is everyone kind of coming, is it kind of like going to a gym where you have kind of a small group of people that show up at a very specific time on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, or every day throughout the week that kind of forms little community groups and everyone's drinking tea and saying hello, or, that sort of thing? Or is it very kind of solitary, enjoy your space, it's kind of isolated space, or is it very communal centric?
It's a little bit of both.
Okay.
So there are work groups that meet because the garden is run completely on volunteer effort.
Mm.
And so there are work days twice a month where people come accrue their community hours. They have to put in 12 hours per plot in order, and that's not in their own plot, but helping the garden in general.
Mm.
So on work days, that's when there are groups of people who come and do stuff together. And then there's usually a potluck and then a general meeting, where people attend and learn about what's happening in the garden. And then there are other more isolated, smaller groups that meet specifically. Like we have a big composting operation, and the shredding crew meets on Tuesdays. And I hear they have a really good coffee klatch. They have like great coffee and donuts. And one of the people who used to be in the garden worked at La Brea Bakery, which is this really famous bakery that
Mm.
makes really incredible pastries. And he would bring a box of those, to the shredding day. And then Saturdays are the composting day where they turn the shredded material into compost piles and turn those piles.
Mm.
And there are other work groups that work. We have a greenhouse where people are starting seeds, and then they have a sale where they sell seedlings for a couple bucks to raise money for the garden, stuff like that.
Very
But
cool.
then people come and go on their own time just to work in their own plots, and we are relegated to daylight hours because there are no lights on the property, and so no one can be there at night.
Gotcha.
But everyone comes whenever they can.
Cool. How does watering work? Who
Good
kind of
question.
regulates and keeps track of water? Are there, I guess it's California, so it doesn't need to be like frost-free hydrants everywhere, or how does the irrigation setup go?
Yeah. Well, and a little bit of irony is that we are on land that's owned by the water district. So it was going to be a big reservoir spot where they were going to put big reservoir tanks or underground reservoirs. But what we have is plumbing that runs down all the rows, and each row has 3 hoses so they can reach all of the plots. And
Uh-huh.
we do pay a water bill, and it used to be reduced. We used to have a discount for nonprofit organizations slash, park property. But that ended a few years ago when the drought was really bad. And so we pay, it's the biggest bill. It's upwards of $5,000 a month for water for the property. So everyone's
For everybody.
for the whole garden. Yeah.
Okay.
And so members pay dues every year to have a plot, and that's part of the budget, is to allocate for member dues to cover the water bill.
So do people kind of fight over this person's watering too much and that person's watering too little? It just is kind of free game, or?
It's kind of free game. We don't have anyone regulating it, but we do have people who are like, guys, the water bill is really expensive this month, so, cut it off. And there are rules about not watering from overhead, water before 9 or after 4 p.m., before 9 a.m. or after 4 for water conservation. It did not have it all evaporate away in the daylight. Just common sense water conservation ideas. And they've spent a lot of time replacing broken valves and fixing the plumbing and all of that kind of stuff, so that they've cut down on leaks.
Gotcha. Now, you said it's the water district. Is it the water district like potable water, or is it like water reclamation?
No, it's, LA Municipal Water District is in
Okay.
charge of both of those things. And so they're in charge of getting water to people's homes and then wastewater management after the fact. So,
Okay.
and we do have, like I said, we share space with the Little League baseball field. Well, they have dugouts, and we have attached downspouts to their dugout roofs, and so we collect rainwater off of those roofs when it does rain, and that gets piped down to the composting operation. So they're using rainwater to water the compost piles with when they build them.
Gotcha. But the water being used in the garden is not reclaimed water.
No, it is
Okay.
not.
Okay.
It's potable, and you could drink from it,
Yeah, assuming you trust the plumbing. Right.
Exactly, right.
Gotcha. Yeah. Now let's talk a little bit about, so there's a lot of diversity here. You've got kind of this group collective compost operation. So all the plant material that's coming off, anything like that, it goes into a shredder, and then it goes into compost that's being managed by somebody on this community. And how do they decide what plant matter goes in? Do they take it all? Do they go, well, this is a little more diseased or has more pests than we want through this, or this has a little bit of fungal pressure? Is any of that looked into?
Oh, yeah. So that's part of the rules and regs. Tomato plants have to go in the dumpster. They don't get composted because we have blight all throughout the garden, and we get a lot of powdery mildew and every kind of blight, early blight, late blight, septoria leaf spot, all of the things. We don't, thankfully, have fusarium wilt or verticillium wilt in the soil, but it's like, all the tomato plants, you compost that. If you shred that, the spores are everywhere, and then that's next year's tomato crop out the door. So those things, plus there are a few really pernicious weeds that we have pictures of so that everybody knows what they look like, and those go in the trash.
Right.
So false garlic, nutsedge, and bindweed are the 3 main ones that must go in the trash. But otherwise, we sort by woody and non-woody materials because we have 2 shredders that can handle, one is a chipper, one's a shredder, and those handle different size materials. And then they pile it all up, and it gets up to 160 degrees anyway, so it's killing most weed seeds and diseases, but we just want to be sure that we're not spreading anything.
Yeah, and when you have that many different people, it's an easy to play the blame game. I think a lot of people have that tendency more so than others, but if they do use, which I want to get to, is that compost then redistributed? Do you get an allotment, a bag per plot or something per year?
Oh, I wish it were that Organized. It's not, I mean, let me be clear. The garden is incredibly organized for compared to so many other gardens
Mm-hmm.
that are smaller and have fewer members. Ours is kind of the gold standard by which a lot of other gardens have based their bylaws and their rules and regs. But when a compost pile is ready, they take the tarp off and they put on a sign that says ready.
Hmm.
And then whoever can
It's
get
game
there,
on.
it's
Game
game
on.
on. Yeah. And I'm in a section of the garden that is across from, I mean, I'm the furthest away you could get from this compost pile. So I almost never use the compost from there. I'm usually bringing in my own, which is fine, but it's there for people who can get to it. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like game on. Is it like when that pile's ready, it's gone that day?
I think it takes a few days for it to go,
Okay. And
but
how big of a pile is that?
so it's a pretty big operation. What they have is sort of a trench. It's how do I explain this? They've created long windrows that
Okay.
are bordered by posts and this woven, or I should say non-woven material. It's
Right.
like it's thicker than a tarp. It's kind
Mm-hmm.
of like a liner material, like a
Yep.
black polyurethane type liner, and they use those as the walls. And the rows are probably 15 to 20 feet long,
Mm-hmm.
maybe longer. And they build them up at least 4 feet tall,
Mm-hmm.
full of biomass. And then when they turn them, people like literally just get in and start shoveling over into the next row. And it
Mm-hmm.
just keeps going until it gets to the front of the section where they pull open the wall and put the ready sign. So
Gotcha.
yeah,
Gotcha.
it's not like they're using bins like home composters,
Sure. Sure. Yeah, so it's significant, and so everyone, I just imagine like a free for all of wheelbarrows and shovels, and everyone kind of running from their little plot, going to scoop their their little allotment before it's too late. I
Yeah,
love
like,
that.
oh, I heard a compost bin's open. Get down there. Yeah.
Very
Um,
cool.
but there's also there isn't. I feel like there's always a pile open, which is nice.
Uh-huh.
But we also take off the city's hands upwards of, I don't know what it is. It's like 250 tons of horse manure off of the local stables. So that gets dumped on our property, and then the crew will use the manure combined with the garden waste to make this amazing hot compost that
Gotcha.
they built. So
Now, when you say crew, is there a paid managed crew?
no, everybody's a volunteer.
So
That's how
it's
they get their hours. Yeah.
okay. So they'll come in, and there's somebody that is choosing to manage all of this out of their volunteer hours, right? How do you
Yes.
become the community garden boss?
So the garden master is one of 14 board positions
Okay.
at our garden. And I was a phase rep for a while. That's each phase of the garden was built at a different time. And so they called them phases. But there's an election every 2 years. Well, there's an election every year, and half of the board is elected on alternating years. And so those positions are sometimes highly coveted. Sometimes nobody can find anyone else to do the job, and then they stay on like I did for 18 years or 20. I was a board member for 20 years.
Wow. So what makes them highly coveted? Is it because they want change and they want their way, or is it
Change and power.
okay?
Yeah. I think highly coveted well, there's a couple of appealing reasons for it. One is that thirst for power. One is also that you get your community hours that way. So your board duties would completely fulfill your member obligation to community, to get community hours. So that's kind of nice.
And to get that right, those are 14 hours a month?
No,
Or is it
it's 12 hours a year per plot. So some people have more than
okay?
one plot and they have to put in an hour per,
Right. So it's
and
an
you have,
extra, yeah, you
yeah,
work an extra hour for the group a month,
basically, yeah.
essentially.
Yeah.
Well, that's not that much.
It's not. And I mean, We had forever, our plot dues were under $100 a
Uh-huh.
year. And some other gardens, they charge that much a month, but it's
Right.
just, yeah,
Yeah, I mean, you think about that, $100 a month, even still, is probably fairly inexpensive. Maybe for a 15 by 15, but $100 a year is like nothing. You're only
I know.
making 5,000 as a garden collectively. That's not a big budget to actually manage and do anything with.
Yeah. And they make it work. There's, like I said, volunteer work is the basis of the whole
Right,
organization.
right,
Everyone's donating their time.
right.
So it's kind of cool that way.
Or is it kind of like a HOA where people will walk by and kind of complain and be like, "Hey, Louisa over there, she's she's not really keeping a clean garden according to the guidelines." And then she gets like a letter or like a text saying,
It's
"Hey,
citation. We call
ooh,
them
it's a
citation.
citation. It's even worse."
Yeah.
Man, it's like in red ink too, or like,
Uh, it used to be on a green notepad that was, very official.
and it was pinned
Um,
on their garden?
it would be in the mailbox.
Ooh, I love it.
So you'd come and you'd see the flag up on your mailbox and you're like, oh no.
There's like the panic of I got a
Yeah.
citation.
Oh
It's like,
no. Yeah.
no.
Yeah, because after a certain number of citations, you get kicked out of the garden. And
Man.
yeah, so
What is
there are
that? Three
some there
strikes? Or is it
three
a three?
it was, yeah, 3 strikes and you're out, basically, yeah.
Man, how can you get back in the good graces, or do you get booted? Is there a wait list for any of
Oh,
these
sure.
plots?
Yeah, and so most of the community gardens around Los Angeles have, like in the city of Santa Monica, they have a collection of 20 community gardens or something like that, and they're on a 5-year wait list. And for a long time, our wait
Wow.
list was about 5 years too. It was 8 months when I joined. That's how not popular gardening was, I guess.
Right.
Um, it's mostly down to under 400 now. So there's enough turnaround or turnover of plots that people are getting in more
So
quickly.
say that again one more time. I want everyone to get that and grasp
Right.
it. So when you first started, you wrote in and you
Yep,
sent a letter in the mail, and you ended up getting on the wait list, and it took 8 months for you to get your plot assigned to you.
that is correct.
Okay. And then if you miss your dues or you have 3 citations, you get out, and the next person on the wait list gets your plot,
Hmm.
and they inherit that plot number, whatever you've done
Yep,
before, and so on and so forth. And
correct.
so now you said the wait list is how long?
It's around 4 years. And
4 years. So
yeah,
you put your money out there, or is there like a deposit, or is it as
no,
soon as
no,
you get in, your money gets drawn?
yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So you just put your name on the wait list. And I tell people all the time, if you don't have a place to garden, just get on a waiting list for a community garden and forget about it. And then someday you will get that magic phone call and you'll be the happiest person on earth, because suddenly you'll have a place to garden that is with other people who also know how to garden. So it's very cool.
Year wait list.
Yeah.
Man, and to
Which goes
think,
by these days, goes by so fast. So really.
man, I'm like, I don't even know if I'm going to be living in this state in 4 years, let alone like, wow. Okay, so you have a 4 year wait list in this community garden. Is there a business model out there for somebody that's like, I want to create this community garden, and I've purchased or bought this plot of land that may be irrigated or has irrigation rights or something, it has water. I'm going to sell plots, like garden plots. Like,
Yeah, I think there are opportunities for people to do that. What most of the time happens around here, though, is there's an organization called the Neighborhood Land Trust, and
okay.
I know that every city has one, or state has one, and they actively help people try and do the legal work that's needed to acquire properties to turn into community gardens or parks or, public spaces. Um, and, because sometimes it's really hard to find out who owns that property or get in touch
Hmm.
with them. and then finding out whether they'd be willing to let you, because if someone with a vacant lot is paying to have it kept up, weeded or whatever, and then they're trying to keep people from squatting on it or throwing their junk on it or gathering nefariously on it or whatever, they
Uh-huh.
might rather have it be put to use as a community garden than what's happening now. So
Uh-huh.
most of the time they're open to the idea, but not always. They're like, I'm going to build an apartment building. So no.
Uh-huh.
Um, and so then there's a rental agreement that's drawn up in terms, etc. And then, the watering situation is worked out depending on what's there. If it's plumbed
Uh-huh.
for irrigation already, they can tap in. If not, they have to pay for that. So it just depends. And, it's different in every situation. Like I said, our
Uh-huh.
land is owned by LADWP. So
Uh-huh.
that's an infrastructure that is easy to work with because they're already an
Uh-huh.
established organization. But one person is a landowner. That's a different scenario. It's completely different. But I see
Right.
it all the time. And more than anything, what I'm seeing is churches are converting their land to community spaces for their members, for their parishioners. And that I love seeing because there's so many people who can use the space and come
Uh-huh.
together as a community
Well, I
that
think
it makes it worth it.
that's so key, for both the mission of what they may be, called to do. And,
Yeah.
I wanted to zoom in here and maybe double click on it because you have 7 acres of vegetables, right?
Yeah.
Essentially that's coming out with a lot of herbs and
And
different things
flowers,
and yeah,
lots of
lots of
flowers.
flowers. Um, is there connections with like local food banks or is it all harvested and kind of for the most part brought back just by the community and the people involved? Because you have 500 people involved anyway.
Yeah. There are a couple different things that we have set up at our garden. One is there are the plots where everyone's gardening. But then on the perimeter of the garden is what we call independent projects. And that's
Mhm.
where all of the fruit trees are. And the fruit trees
Oh,
I know, there are more than 250 trees on the property. And the trees are meant to be not just one person's tree, although it's really hard sometimes to share.
hmm,
But the idea is that the person would tend that tree, and then at least half of the fruit is supposed to go to the community. So the
okay.
person will either put up a sign that says it's ready, and you're only supposed to harvest what you can fit in your cupped hands, which is, honor system. And I've seen people with bags just, loading stuff
I
off.
can
And
hold the cupped hand.
we
Yes.
do have cameras on the property, so they sometimes get caught and they're terminated for theft. But
Right.
um, in the spirit
Citation.
of good faith,
Triple citation.
yeah, right. So right off the bat, no, theft is like cause for termination right away. But the so on work days, the IP coordinator will arrange to harvest some fruit off of the trees and have it brought to the meeting, and people will take tangerines or oranges or whatever because it's mostly citrus, but there's a lot of
Right.
other stuff too with them. And so that's one avenue of sharing the produce. The other is we have one volunteer who works with Meals on Wheels, and
Right.
she on Sundays will collect excess produce from anyone who's offering.
Okay.
So there's a collection spot under a tree in the main meeting area where people will leave stuff, and she'll take that to Meals on Wheels and they'll prepare food for people that they're taking, in their
Yeah.
cars.
Yeah. Well, it's very, very cool.
Yeah.
I'd like to go ahead and try and pivot away from, I mean, I probably could just ask questions about this community garden because it's such a fascinating thing all day long, but I want to get into
Yeah.
some of the book writing and the garden nerd and just kind of your depth of focus
Sure.
and where you've got into. So, um, around what year did you write your first book and what was the main topic about besides was it the community and did you kind of dig into soil health or specifics of growing in that climate? Talk to me about that.
Sure. So my book, High Yield Small Space Organic Gardening, is an updated version of what was my first gardening book, which was at the time called Gardening for Geeks. And I wrote that in 2012. It was published in 2013. And it is all about growing food in small spaces. And so, of course, the primary focus is on good soil because you can't
Mm-hmm.
grow biointensively without really good soil.
Mm-hmm.
So I had learned a lot about the soil food web and how to steward that microorganism life, in the
Mm-hmm.
soil, that underground ecosystem, so I like to
Mm-hmm.
call it, and made that the focus of, if your soil is in good shape, you're not going to need any bug spray, basically, because
Mm-hmm.
everything outgrows bugs if you treat it well enough. So if it's happy enough. Um, so that was the first gardening book. And then it was updated and republished in 2020, right as the pandemic was hitting us. Um, and then during the pandemic, I wrote a second. I got two book deals at the same time, and that was for the fruit gardening in small spaces, grow your own mini fruit garden from Cool Springs Press. And that's just like growing vegetables in small spaces, you can grow fruit in small spaces. There are just different parameters you need to know in order to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So that book I was working on, and I also got a book deal for my novel, Garden Variety, which is, as we were just talking about, all that community garden stuff is just fodder for story. So
Mm-hmm.
I created this story that I had started long ago and then put away. And honestly, it took me about 20 years over time to just get it
Mm-hmm.
all written and whatnot. And I've written the sequel to Garden Variety. It's with my agent right now, but publisher hasn't picked it up yet. So at some point, that sequel will come out,
Mm-hmm.
and people will be able to continue their journey with the characters in Garden Variety.
So, walk me through these characters in this book. What is it kind of highlighting some of the tension there, or were these like
Oh, yeah.
real? Yeah, like I'm just picturing like
Oh, yeah.
the garden drama, of a decade. And are people going to find kind of themselves in that book, or with the characters that you've drawn out and kind of crafted?
Well, I hope so. I made sure to create characters who were on all kind of along the spectrum of age and diversity. It's all
Mm-hmm.
about diversity because it's a community garden, so that made sense. So the story centers around Lizzie, who is a section rep in the garden on the board, and there are a bunch of characters on the board. It sort of focuses on most of the people on the board, and the garden master and the president of the board, and they're all very different types of people.
Mm-hmm.
And the infighting, the power struggle on the board between the president and the one who wants her job. And there's a little love story that goes along with Lizzie, the main character in the story. The garden master is dealing with some personal family stuff, but it's like there are gardening lessons peppered throughout the story. So you're learning how to garden as you're reading the story. And I
Gotcha.
think think that's the main thing that people say. But like, I'm not even into gardening, but I learned so much as I was reading this book. So it's I actually had started Garden Variety well before I ever wrote my first gardening book. And
Mm-hmm.
that was how I wanted to teach people how to garden. I wanted it to be told through story rather than here's a book to learn how to garden. So
Right.
it's all of
I
those
think of
things.
some authors that I feel like in many ways do that really, really well in different fields, like a Patrick Lancioni, writing about business kind of shares the story of a business's rise and fall through the hiring process, if you will, and, choosing the wrong people to put around, the project or whatever. What's kind of I don't know if it ruins it, but what's kind of the crescendo? I know you're trying to teach gardening, but what's kind of that ending emotion that somebody might have when they finish your book? Are they going to have more grace for others and where they're coming from? Are they going to want to jump into the garden to find their, long, their next love interest? Or like what
Yeah,
is kind
I
of the
think
goal there?
a number of things happen. So in the story, the garden itself is threatened
Okay.
by
Excellent.
external forces. So there's that piece. And then Lizzie has her own journey, which happens to deal with vulnerability and trust, which I
Wow.
don't know, maybe there's a few people out there who have issues with those
Wait.
things. and and then there's just the idea of there's a thread of what it's like to deal with isolation and loneliness running through the whole thing. And I think just the aging process in general for some of the characters.
Wow.
Um, so it's a lot of things,
Hmm.
and the garden situation resolves itself, and like the gardening cycle, we go full circle in the garden. It
Yeah.
goes month by month through the garden season, so you'll see a year and a half cycle going through, and then by the end you're like, oh, okay, we've grown, we've
Right.
learned, and
Right.
we're ready to move on.
Right. Now, where are you in this book?
I'm Lizzie, basically 20,
Okay.
30 years ago.
Okay.
And I made her more neurotic. Maybe I made her more neurotic than I was then.
Okay.
But certainly she's based on me as a section rep. I think she probably has more well, I gave her different traits, wise, than I have, but certainly that's where it started. And every character is sort of an amalgamation of 3 or 4 people that I know
Sure. Yeah.
from the garden or otherwise. So I think a lot of my friends might be able to identify themselves in those characters.
I don't think people are alone in this. Maybe in their community, or maybe it's like the passion of like the garden or where they're at. But do you mind kind of sharing your experience with maybe the loneliness and the isolation in the garden and kind of that aging um that you described with Lizzie in the
Yeah,
story?
so I think in a city, it is very easy to feel alone, when there's 10,000 people around you. I mean, I grew up in a small-ish town where everyone knew your business, and I hated that. And so I
Wow.
loved the
Yeah.
idea of moving to Los Angeles where anonymity was a given, right? You could walk around.
Yeah.
It took 10 years before I ran into someone I knew in a public space. That's what it was like
Wow.
for me in
Yeah.
LA. But you build friendships over time, and but some people are better at that than others. As an
Yeah.
introvert, that's not really my forte. But
Right.
but there's that feeling, even when you're surrounded by people, that you can feel alone or lonely, depending
Uh-huh.
on where you are emotionally. So I think um, it's something, especially in this day and age of, Zoom and television screens and all of the stuff, where we're gathering together less in
Right.
person, and we're doing more in our comfortable spaces from a distance. And gardening is one of those things, especially community gardens, brings people out into the world, into nature, communing with plants and wildlife, and then other gardeners, hopefully, as a
Uh-huh.
bonus. So it's a saving grace for a lot of people, I think. And just to have that space available to go to, it fixes a lot of problems, I think.
Man, that is so good. And I think a lot of people do find themselves surrounded by people, but infinitely separated at the same time. They don't feel
Exactly.
connected.
Yeah.
What would be your tips or your encouragement for those who feel like they're in that place where they may be surrounded by people, but they don't have any connection?
Right.
Um,
Well, I think, for me, the answer comes from being curious. Uh, because I know a lot of people get in a situation where, like, I don't know how to start a conversation, or I don't know what to say. But if you start asking questions of the people you're around, you're going to start opening up doors and seeing pathways of connection between you and that person. So be curious, ask a question is really the starting point, I think, for me, because I forget
mhm.
that that's what you can, like, oh,
Right,
it's
right,
pretty much that easy. If you could just
right,
think of something to ask them, they'll start talking, and it's
right.
usually usually works out.
Man, I think of this this gal that's been volunteering at our farm store, and she's just so good at that, just naturally gifted in that realm where it's like, what are you doing this weekend?
Hmm.
They're shopping for produce, but she can just naturally fill that dead air in that space where half of us would just be like paralyzed with like awkwardness.
Yeah, because on the outside, we don't feel like we look like other people or feel like other people or have the same lives as other people. But we're all on the same little dot in the middle of this giant universe. And so we have a lot more in common than we think we do.
Right.
Yeah.
And some of us just really struggle with like our facial expressions. We just have this resting, like
Resting.
our
Yes.
RBF, our
Yes.
resting grump face.
Yes,
right?
mine is getting more and more defined as
Man, like I really need to work on just smiling. Like
yeah.
it would be so much better.
I've had friends who are like, "Are you okay?" I'm like, "No, this is just what I look like now."
It's fine. I've just been frowning my whole life,
Yeah,
and it's just stuck. I'm sorry.
This is just the way my face looks now.
And that's terrible. So, Christy, we've been talking so much about just this community dynamic, and I'm sure that I would love to stay there like all day long, and continue to ask questions. But I know a bunch of people are wanting to know, like, hey, well, she's such a good gardener. What is she going to have to say about soil and teaching us how to grow, and what are some tips and tricks that she's learned along the way? Since this is primarily, I'm guessing, a lot of raised beds or, kind of building a raised bed, and a lot of people have shifted to that technique, how do you suggest building a soil within a raised bed?
Right. And I think, we mentioned earlier about bagged soil and that kind of thing. But if you're going to build soil from what you have, and you have not already gotten a soil test done, that's the starting point. And you can do a simple NPK and pH test with a home test kit like Rapid Test. That's one you can buy and have at home. Or you can take a sample and send it into a lab. Your local university ag department will have soil test rates that are pretty low cost. Or you can send off to a soil lab like what we have here in LA. We use Wallace Laboratories. And for $95, I think it might have gone up, but they do a regular soil test, standard agricultural soil analysis is what it's called. And that includes not only your nutrients, your big three nutrients, and your soil pH, but it also includes heavy metals analysis, which is usually extra with the university lab tests. And that is checking for lead, zinc, arsenic, and several other heavy metals that can cause problems in the garden or be unsafe to grow in. So we have a lot of lead in our soil. I've only done a few tests where we came up without lead in the soil, which was great. But high zinc is a problem sometimes here, and that can happen if you're over-amending or over-watering. It becomes difficult for microbes, like the good microbes, to live, and those die off, and then the anaerobic microbes start to persist. And that changes your soil, I don't want to say your soil chemistry, but it changes the availability of certain heavy metals. Soils become more alkaline, zinc becomes more available. I'm sorry, when soils become more acidic, zinc becomes more available. And zinc binds up nutrients, so you can put tons and tons of fertilizer on it, and stuff will just sit there for 2 months like this big, tiny as seedlings. So I run into that problem a lot because people keep adding fertilizers thinking, oh, it's not growing. And then we do a soil test and we've got oversupply. It's like high levels of zinc. And so we're usually remediating soils by aerating, fluffing up the soil, getting more oxygen in there, and cutting out all nutrients at that point because there's oversupply in the soil. And then we keep aerating, and we only use micronutrients that we need, like what you find in worm castings. So you can overdo it, is what I'm saying. That was a long-winded way of saying it. So starting with a soil test will mean you're less likely to over-amend your soil with nutrients. I always recommend using organic fertilizers instead of synthetic fertilizers because synthetic fertilizers bond to water molecules really, really readily, and so they pass through your soil and down into the water table and out into waterways more readily than organic fertilizers do. So, but oversupply of anything will still, too much is too much of anything will end up in the water supply. So, start with a soil test, amend accordingly, and really the soil biology is the big part for me. Making sure you've got happy bacteria and fungi. And we could talk about this kind of all day long, but it's
let's go there.
The long and the short. So the fun part about this soil science for me is that your plants will determine what soil pH it wants. I love this. This is so cool. So plants will either exude through their roots sugars or acids. If they want more bacteria colonizing their roots, they'll exude sugars. If they want, and that subsequently is connected to soil pH. So on the spectrum of soil pHs or and succession of plant material, alkaline soil tends to be grasslands. So grasslands, like lower on the succession process, grasslands are alkaline and they are bacterially dominant. Those things are connected. Forests on the other end of the spectrum usually are acidic and fungal dominant. So because those plants are requesting those microbes to feed them or to help their survival. So when a plant exudes sugars, it's attracting more bacteria to it. When a plant exudes acids, it's attracting more fungi to it. And that's kind of the simplest way of putting this relationship between plants and the microbes in the soil together. So
let's say that you have a soil profile that is high in zinc, creating some nutrient tie-up, or maybe it's high in phosphorus, and you're alkaline. As a grower, you would then, from what you just said, want to lean on amending the soil in a way that's going to do what? Are you going to, if you're alkaline, do you want to be focusing on humic acids to then trigger a lot of your fungally dominated microbes within that soil profile so that the plant doesn't have to do as much work through the exudates, or is that the other way around?
You want to keep your soil alkaline because the lower the pH, the more towards acidity it go, the more available zinc becomes. Whereas the more alkaline it is, the more zinc is bound up. So you want that bacterial soil, but humic acids are always great. There's kind of it. I don't know that, and I've seen anything ever suffer because of the addition of humic acids.
It's quite a large threshold on the studies that I've seen of how much you can add before it becomes a problem.
Right. It's like kind of like coffee grounds. You would have to put a truckload of coffee grounds in your garden for it to actually change the soil pH. It's not going to change the soil pH. So, anyway, the thing about the presence or the imbalances that occur in your soil, it has a lot to do with compaction. Because if your soil gets compacted, if you're overwatering, your soil gets compacted. And then that starts to squeeze out the oxygen in the soil. And then that leaves nothing for good bacteria to operate with. And so one of the first things we do is aerate the soil, not till, but we aerate. So broad forking, where you stick a digging fork in the ground, just rock it back and just kind of lift the soil up and get it to the point where it's exposed to oxygen, and that starts breeding the right bacteria, and then you start getting more in balance, and then stuff starts to grow again. And you can sort of see that over a couple of months when we do that. I like worm castings because they're micronutrients on a broad spectrum. So you're not putting a whole bunch of nitrogen in. You're not putting a whole bunch of phosphorus in, although it is a good source of, it's potassium, I think. I always forget whether it's phosphorus or potassium that worm castings are good for. But those, broad spectrum, low level nutrients is kind of the way to go to help. And they, it kickstarts a lot of other functions in the soil. So it's good for a lot of things. But aeration is helpful in that, and cutting back on watering. I had a neighbor who was liberal with her watering on the soil, and so stuff stopped growing,
Huh.
and she couldn't figure out why. And I was like, let's take a look at this. And I would dig, 6 inches, 8 inches down, and it smelled like garbage, anaerobic bacteria. It was super, super
Hmm.
stopped up down there. Aeration, cut back on water, and see what happens. A little bit of worm castings usually goes a long way. And that soil test. I mean, I keep coming back to soil tests because
Hmm.
you could be giving it something it doesn't need.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
What are some other, there's so many different products out there, both to the home grower and to the commercial grower. And I've seen more often than not that the commercial growers they're doing, their livelihood depends on it. So they're doing soil tests and they're, really diving down the soil health, you know, wormhole, if
Avenue.
you will.
Yeah.
Yeah, they keep traveling down that world trying to figure out how to maximize their yields because that is what their livelihood is on. There's a lot of different products out there, and from your experience, what is the home? What is some of the best bang for the buck for the home gardener, and how can they basically feed what they're missing if they do have a soil report? And then in what form would you suggest?
Right. Good question. I'm going to preface this by saying I am really not a fan of all of the hacking that's going on out
Hmm.
there in the world. There's so many people who are like, I'm going to win against nature. I'm like, that's not how it works. You can hack and hack and hack, but you push something in one direction and nature pushes back. And it just, I was trying to fix my soil issue with the zinc, and I put gypsum on the soil, and it ended up making the zinc more available. It's like, just stop using a whole bunch of stuff. Like, really, the less you use, the better your garden is, almost always. I feel like compost, worm castings, and compost tea are the three best tools you can use in your garden, and mulch. That's the fourth. So good chip bark will go a long way. Um, so I might not be the best person to ask about, like, here are all the products I
Hmm.
use
Hmm.
to make my garden work, because I do less if I can, because I
Hmm.
want nature to do more. I'd rather.
Awesome. So
Yeah.
how do you do that? Let's just say that you did four different things there, and those are pretty four specific and very clear things that you use in your garden to have good success. So what are those, and then how do they combine with the physical practices in order for people to accomplish good results?
Sure. So mulch is one of the things that I use, a thick layer of chip bark, and I'm sure your audience has probably heard of Chip Drop. It's a Ramiel wood chip service. They'll drop
Uh-huh.
wood chips that are directly from arborists who are tree trimming out there.
Uh-huh.
And as long as it's disease free, and sometimes you can take logs if you want to do some hugel culture, but they'll deliver. You sign up for it. You're never really sure when it's going to show up, but they'll give you a 48 hours notice. And then you get a truckload, and I mean like 22 cubic yards. It's a lot, uh, dumped on your driveway. I know here at Garden Nerd headquarters, we can absorb 17 cubic yards. I digress. But what happened? I'm going to give you an example. The best way mulch works. When we first bought this house, it had patches where it was flooding. It was clay. It would not drain. It was pooling up everywhere when it would rain.
Uh-huh.
And our contractor was like, you need to put in a French drain. And so we put in a French drain, and we still had pooling and flooding everywhere. And I said, now can we put down 5 inches of mulch? So we did a chip drop. We put down 5 inches of mulch. And then within 4 months, the soil dug like butter. There was no pooling and no flooding at all. And the reason is, when you put down mulch, which is a fungal food, it feeds the fungi in the soil and helps build more of them. Fungi tunnels the network of soil food web for you and starts making it more porous and air friable. So it drains better. So It's the laziest. I mean, yeah, it took us like 5 hours to spread mulch all over the yard, but we did that, and then we didn't have to do it for another 2 or 3 years or 5 years or whatever it was. And that mulch was free. We did bring in some help to help spread it around. But it was like the cheapest, easiest, naturalist thing you could do. Naturalist is not a word in that context, but whatever. Anyway, so that's mulch. And mulch is, if you just remember, mulch is a fungal food. I would like to make my soil more fungal dominant, put down some mulch. And then compost is, like I said before, we were talking about how it solves both soil compaction, clay and sandy soil problems, drainage issues, and non-drainy, too drainy issues. And then compost tea, if you're making active aerated compost tea, not just putting compost in a burlap sack and soaking it for 8 hours, but aerating that compost tea for no more than 24, usually no more than 18 hours, because then they use up all the foods in there and start to die. But that's the best kind of nutrient. It's just biology. You're adding biology to your soil. You're inoculating your soil with biology, which, if you are on municipal water, is killed off when you water. So biology is killed off by the chlorine or chloramine that's in the water. So when you are watering, we're all doing the best we can with what we have, and that's we can't. I mean, I save rainwater and use that as much as I can, but there's going to be some municipal water in my garden. So compost tea re-inoculates. It's just like taking acidophilus, or whatever you're taking to help your microbiome in your gut. It helps repopulate the critters in the soil, your soil food web. So that was okay. And then worm castings. Have we talked about worm castings yet? I don't know.
We've talked about them, and kind of, I think some people, why don't you give a rundown of what they are, how to access them, the different kinds, and then we can kind of go from there.
Okay, so the best worm castings are the ones you make at home with your own little worm factory. You can have as something. I've seen people use toy boxes, like old wooden toy boxes. I've had people use Rubbermaid bins, or you can buy the official like worm tower. The trick is fresh worm castings that you're making at home with your own collection of worms. They're not sterilized and put in a bag to sell. So, there are all kinds of benefits from the ones that you can produce, the castings you can produce at home. Castings is a nice way of saying poop. Worm poop. I've said this, if you've ever heard another interview with me, I've said this a million times. Worm castings are a nutrient as well as a pest control. They have an enzyme in them because worms don't have teeth. They have enzymatic mouthparts. And so when they digest food with this enzyme called chitinase, that comes out in the castings. And when you put that down on your plants that are being infested by mealybugs, whitefly, aphids, leafhoppers, things that are technically sucking insects, they take up that chitinase into their bodies because the plant has taken up into its cells and leaves and stems. And chitinase happens to be the thing that dissolves the exoskeletons of soft-bodied insects. So it's pretty effective at pest control. So I like to have worm castings in my soil at all times if possible. And there are some really good brands out there, but if all you can get is worm gold, that's fine too. Just start with that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Big shout out to Steve Churchill at the Urban Worm Company. And I think we're going to have him on the podcast coming up in a few episodes. So really looking forward to that. If you want to learn all about how to start your own worm casting, big shout out to the Urban Worm Company. He's got all sorts of great data on that as well.
Excellent.
So you talked about teas and making teas, and you talked about brewing compost tea. And we briefly went into that and kind of the process of making it. There's compost extract, there's compost tea. And then you talked about putting that in a sprayer and spraying it on your plants. What is that actually doing, and how is that spreading biology out there?
Yeah. So if you're using, I have a backpack sprayer. I have a solo backpack sprayer, and you need your wand, your sprayer, to have at least a 400 micron mesh on it so that the biology can actually get through the mesh and distribute. So I like to apply it as a foliar spray on the leaves, top and bottom of all my fruit trees. And then I use soil drenches to apply on my beds, my raised beds, directly on the soil to inoculate everything. I also did an experiment a while ago where I brewed compost tea every 2 weeks and sprayed it on my tomato plants because we here, coastal Los Angeles, get powdery mildew and all the blights I mentioned earlier.
Uh-huh.
And I wanted to see if I could control any of that by using a fungal dominant compost tea. Because good fungi beats bad fungi, or at least it tries. It's hard to make fungal dominant compost tea, though. It wants to be bacterially dominant. So you have to breed fungi in your compost first,
Uh-huh.
and then fingers crossed, hope for the best, etc. I've sprinkled oats on it to make it bloom. It actually blooms a little fungi on the top, and I'm like, okay, let's spray. So I was successful in keeping powdery mildew at bay. No, it's the other way around. I was successful at keeping blight at bay, but not powdery mildew. The year that I was experimenting with every 2 weeks. But I had a lot of tomatoes, so that was something. I've stopped trying to fight powdery mildew. It is pointless. It is a fruitless effort where I live. So I just live with it, and I tell people just cut off the bad stuff and look
So
the other way.
I would imagine that the nutrient uptake from spreading that biology, specifically of boron, and probably manganese, was probably the main blight fighting compound.
Oh, interesting.
Um,
Yeah, I hadn't done a lab test on that compound to see, to see what it had in it,
yeah, I believe it's boron, manganese, and there's one other one. I'm not sure. I can't remember off the top of my head of, that. What are we talking about? The late season blight.
Yeah.
And then powdery mildew, I'm actually fighting right now on a lot of different crops out here in Arizona.
Ooh, fun.
No, not so much. Trying to make sure that I get a good pumpkin crop for the pumpkin festival, coming up,
Very
where
good.
I'm starting to fight that powdery mildew. So it's like, okay, I need to stay ahead of it. What would your suggestions be there on fighting it? You just said you kind of throw your hands up and surrender.
Right. So the interesting thing about powdery mildew is that there are hundreds of different types of powdery mildew, and they are species specific. So you'll get a powdery mildew that is specific to squash, and that's going to be different than the powdery mildew that you get on your tomatoes. And so it's a moving target, one size does not fit all. And there was, for a time, a bacterial biological spray called Serenade that was kind of good at preemptively keeping it from happening. But Serenade is no longer available to a number of states and or in consumer sizes. It's sold by the gallon as Cease or Sonata. And some places you have to have a license in order to use it. But it's a bacterial spray. So I was like, okay, you're fighting bacteria. You're fighting fungi with bacteria, which is great. I know that when I start to see it, I will rub it out to try and stop it from spreading. If you can see a beginning spot, you rub it out, it stops it from spreading. But
oftentimes you catch it way too late.
Way too late, exactly. So we trim off the stuff that's affected. We feed it enough to stimulate new growth. And around here, and I'm just being totally honest, if you put your squash in, your summer squashes, not your pumpkins, but if you put your summer squashes in spring, early spring, March, April, whenever, by June, July, they're done. And then you pull them out and you plant another one. and that gets you through the rest of summer. And that's kind of how we manage it around here.
Right.
So I think, I have tested, I'll tell you what I've tried that hasn't worked. I have a friend who has a bamboo vinegar business, it's biochar company that also sells a vinegar. It's called bamboo vinegar, and it is supposed to kill anything fungal on contact. And I've used it at the aggressive ratio that was suggested for killing killing the diseases. And I have a friend who had a compost tea business who used it at the soil sterilization level, and it still didn't stop powdery mildew. Yeah. So, there are a bunch of sprays out there, I don't know, it's a Captain Jack or something. There's, trifecta.
Yeah, Captain Jack, I think, is a spinosad.
It's a spinosad, right? Okay, so
I would think that it's been touted for so many years as being both fungal and insecticidal, but neem oil,
right. And that's sort of a last resort for me, and just like how copper spray is an absolute last resort if you're dealing with diseases on fruit trees, because copper persists in soils. It's a heavy metal. It does not dissipate. And so you can have a copper buildup in your soil and then nothing grows there after a while. So be careful with that. Yeah. So I'm just, I feel like we're growing annuals. If they don't work out this year, try again next year. You just nurse them along. You cut off the bad stuff and feed it and water it. And that's what I take. Maybe I'm old and jaded and I just don't want to deal with it anymore, but that's kind of my approach,
Yeah, well, I think it definitely depends on the scale in which you're growing and your threshold for loss. And that's really kind of the challenge. I feel like within having worked with both large scale growers at very large 5,000, 10,000, 15,000 acres and above.
And they can't afford to lose to just cut
and
off
even
fields.
small ones. But even in that case, a lot of times they're all they have crop insurance. It's the small guy that doesn't have the crop insurance, and their threshold for losses is a greater risk, and in many things, and that's why they grow diverse crops, right? Rather than just corn, rice, or soybean.
Right.
And so
diversity is key.
Diversity is key. So, tell me a little bit about your books. You've written several books. We talked about some of them are kind of like garden fiction. I don't know what the genre would be. Where do people find those books? I'd like to link those in the show notes. And where do they find you online?
Yeah, sure. You can find pretty much everything about me and my gardening work at gardennerd.com, GARDENERD.com. And the books are all available there too, or at your favorite local independent bookseller. I don't like to suggest that anybody give Amazon any money, but you can certainly patronize your local bookseller and they can order it for you if they don't have it in stock. So the books, the gardening, if you're growing vegetables, high yield, small space organic gardening is for you. If you're wanting to grow fruits in small spaces, that's Grow Your Own Mini Fruit Garden. And the novel is Garden Variety, and the sequel is written and out there. I just have to get the publisher to say yes, and then we're waiting on that. And otherwise, keep your eyes peeled. And
Awesome.
Garden Variety has been translated into Spanish as well for the Spain audience. So you can find it in Spanish too.
Very cool. What about an audiobook? We're listening on podcast. We have listeners.
Right. So there was an audiobook the audio version of the book of Garden Variety was recorded. So I threw my hat in the ring, but they hired a professional instead to do it. And so that is out there. If you want to listen to books while you're driving around or walking, you can do that.
Awesome. That's totally fun. Christy, thank you so much for your time and being generous with it. And I hope you enjoyed the conversation. I had a blast learning about this community garden. And I think it's just a cool concept. And I just I have, my imagination goes wild with all the eclectic people within gardening, from folks like me and anyone in between. I know that I'm kind of a riot and a mess, and I can imagine if there's a bunch of me all in one place, what kind of challenges that would be. So I'm actually really tempted to go out, even though I farm, but I kind of want to get a little community garden plot just to see what that's like.
Just to see what it's like.
See how many citations I could get.
It's really fun. I mean, there are all kinds of people involved in the community garden, and I encourage everyone who doesn't have space to grow at home to do that.
That's so fun and so cool. Christy, thank you again for jumping into the How I Grow This podcast. For those, if you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe, maybe share it with a friend, or, nudge your neighbor that is in the community gardening center and make fun of them with how many citations they've received so far for not gardening or following the guidelines. So if you thought this was totally fun, share it with somebody, give us a rating and a review, and we would definitely appreciate that. Really helps push the show forward in the algorithm and everything, so that the internet overlords can prioritize what people like, and they only know that through your help. So thank you so much. I hope that was super helpful for you, and we look forward to the next episode of How I Grow This.